G'day guys, today let's talk about slow motion, or more frame interpolation, and how you produce slow motion in post, particularly when you're not shot for slow motion. Let's just jump straight into it, shall we? So let's look at our timeline here, and we've basically got two clips of a guy running. There's this shot, which is already in a little bit of slow-mo, and there is this shot, which has no slow-mo whatsoever. So we are going to slow those down today, and we're going to talk about how and when you should use different frame interpolation methods and what they generally do. So usually you go speed and duration, and you would adjust the speed of your clip to make it slow-mo. So we might halve the speed, so we change it to 50%, and our shot would be half the speed, as you can see. Now we'd need to render that to play it back smoothly and get the full effect, but you get what we're saying, so let's undo that. However, down here you've got your time interpolation, and this is where a lot of people make their mistakes and a lot of people go wrong, is not understanding these three options: frame sampling, frame blending, and optic flow. So to show you these, we're going to jump into this little example I've set up here. Now, these are frames of blackness. It doesn't really make any difference what's on the screen, because for our example, I'm not going to worry about that. So we've basically got two frames. If you can imagine a sequence being 25 frames a second, here's two of them. If we are 25 frames a second and we want to go slow-mo with a 25 frames a second shot, all of a sudden these one frames are going to be moved one frame apart, and there's this gap in the middle right here that we have to fill somehow, because we're doubling the amount of frames we're needing per second. So that's where these three options come in right here. We've got our frame sampling, frame blending, and optic flow. So we first start with frame sampling. What that is going to do, our first frame and our second frame, in between those two, it's going to copy our first frame, and lo and behold, we're going to hold that first frame, so it's going to be the first frame again, then the second frame. It produces that really jittery slow motion that you're probably used to seeing with, you know, police released footage from CCTV cameras or something that have a low frame rate to begin with. Or if you want to create that kind of jittery, jumpy slow motion effect, that's generally how you do it. So that's frame sampling. Then we go to frame blending. Now what frame blending does is it then copies the second clip. So you've got, the second frame. So you've got frame one, frame two, and between the two, they've taken a copy of frame one, a copy of frame two, and they've kind of set them at 50% opacity, if you want to think about it that way. So it's kind of like a fade between each clip. Each frame, So this frame in the middle is now a blend of the first frame and the second frame, and it blends it together, and it gives it that really ghosty, kind of blurry effect that you often see in a lot of daytime television slow motion dramatic moments. You've got that kind of blurry, ghost traily, kind of ethereal slow motion. So that is how that kind of effect works, that frame sampling. Finally, we have optic flow. Now this one is a little bit more complicated, because what it does is it analyzes the first frame, analyzes the second frame, and it generates the frame in between, or what it thinks more accurately. So what it actually makes is a third frame. And different tools do this different ways, all the way back to Twixtor, before Premiere actually had it built in. Tools like DaVinci will do it, Avid will do it, pretty much any editing platform or third-party plugin you can get will do a similar effect to this. And basically, they differ from each effect, but a lot of them use contrast to build masks around each element that it can detect as an element. It tries to figure out, well, if this element starts here and ends there, then clearly it has to travel here. So it's going to try and mask and move that element. So you've got that kind of fake slow motion, and it's usually a best option for very natural looking slow motion. However, you can get a lot of artifacts doing that, so you do have to be quite careful, especially in my experience. I find if you're working with lower bitrate footage, lower quality cameras that don't quite have the detail, there's less for the computer to analyze, and so the effects are less than stellar. So let's take what we've just learned right here with these 3 clips and apply it to our sequence so we can see a good idea of our different kinds of slow motion. So we can start with this shot, which already has a little bit of slow motion to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to slow that right down to something extreme, let's say maybe 20%. So now our runner is going to be running very slowly. We can see the frame difference there. So let's just pick a little bit of this. I'm going to render it, and remember, we'll shorten it even down here. There we go. Make it even easier on my poor computer for this one. Now, remember we're on frame sampling, which is that blurring method. So let's have a look at that. So here now we have our frame sampling. So we get a full screen now. I'm going to play it back, and you can see it's that really choppy slow motion as it goes kind of frame by frame, duplicating the last one. Great for that certain effect if you want to use it, but overall, not usually the best result for what you want. So let's try changing our time interpolation method to frame blending right here. And we're going to render that one again. So you can see now we've got, and we'll full screen it again, frame blending, and you can see it's got that kind of opacity effect, and some of them slow moving objects come out okay. So if you generally have really slow moving objects, and I have got away with this in the past, frame blending can actually be very effective. And again, if you want that really dramatic soap opera-y kind of thing, it's quite good. But in scenes like this where there is a lot of movement, it really does fall apart quite quickly. In our footage right here, we probably have a similar effect if we were to cut this one out right here. We'll mark our in and out point, so I'm going to slow it right down to 20% as well. And use our frame blending tool. There we go. Into into out. So you can see with this one, you've still got that blending, but these more static moving objects are a bit nicer. So the road is a bit cleaner. The overall result is not as bad as it is with this one, where you've got a lot of blurring on the background as well, because the background is moving in parallel to us. Whereas if you're, especially if you've got a static locked off shot and you've just got one subject moving, you can usually get away with quite a lot. So let's now move back to our first shot, and let's give a demonstration of our final tool, which is optic flow. This one is generally the most intensive on your computer, so if you are working on a lower end machine, it'd be a bit of a knockaround, but for most properly built editing systems, even low end ones, it really shouldn't be that much of an issue. So let's try this. Okay, so now let's look at our optic flow footage full screen, and you can see we've got that smoother motion, especially in the background, but we can see a lot of that artifacting and jelliness down here across the legs as our subject is running. So it's quite interesting. You can see it right there. I have, of course, had lots of great success stories in the past with optic flow. It's fantastic, and generally is your first port of call, but depending on what the footage is, it can be a bit dicey. So that's really the basics of those 3 tools. Now you've got a better understanding of what they do and how to adjust them. You know when best to use them and when not to use them. And especially when it comes to stylistic choices in slow motion, now understanding how they work, you've probably got a better chance of putting together exactly what you want in the long term. So that's pretty much it. It's probably a bit of a quicker video today, but it was just a quick topic, but one that I see a lot of people having trouble with. And so that's it. Get out, play with it, experiment, and that's it. Stay creative.